Okay, so we have arrived at the starting time for the next talk. So the next talk is by Dakshita Khurana, who has a PhD from UCLA, was with Microsoft Research before and is now at University of Illinois. She'll be telling us about post-quantum multi-party computation. This is joint work with Amit Agarwal, James Bartusek, Vipul Goyal, Giulio Malavolta. So Dakshita, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Ivan, for that introduction, and thanks to all the organizers for organizing such a fantastic workshop, and for giving me the opportunity to be a part of it. I also want to thank James Bartusek for letting me steal some of his slides. He's also going to be giving the next talk, and he's a fantastic speaker as well. So this talk is going to be about post-quantum multi-party computation. This is joint work with Amit Agarwal, James Bartusek, Vipul Goyal, and Giulio Malavolta. And so hopefully by now we all know what multi-party computation is, but I have a slide there just in case. So MPC allows a set of parties with private inputs to jointly compute a public function of these private inputs in such a way that an adversary corrupting some of the parties learns no information about the private inputs of other parties beyond what beyond the output of the functionality. In this talk, we will care about polynomial time adversaries that corrupt participants statically, meaning before the protocol begins, and behave in arbitrarily malicious ways. And there's been a long line of work getting classical MPC secure against such adversaries, and I'm sure I may have missed a few citations. There's been many works. These are mostly all works that are relevant to the plain model, where there is no trusted setup or idealized models, and there is no idealized assumption like the random oracle. And what we are interested in this talk is understanding how to achieve security against quantum polynomial time machines. And in the two-party setting, this question has been explored in some prior work, but it looks like, surprisingly, in the multi-party setting, we don't know whether it's possible, or prior to this work, we didn't know whether it was possible to even achieve multi-party computation with security against arbitrary quantum adversaries. The type of security that we will aim for is simulation-based security, where we want that the view of an adversary that interacts with a single or a set of honest parties be indistinguishable from the view of an adversary that interacts with a simulator, where crucially the simulator does not have access to the inputs of honest parties at all. In fact, the simulator just queries an ideal functionality and obtains, just has input-output access to the behavior of the functionality that parties are trying to compute. And typically in all these settings, because the simulator can only interact with the ideal functionality in this way, it must find a way to extract the implicit inputs that are being used by corrupted players in a multi-party protocol. Now, in this work, we are interested in understanding security against quantum machines. And this leads to various challenges. So to understand those challenges, I want to talk about what a simulator has to do in order to extract such inputs. Now, note that in any multi-party computation protocol, we have the requirement that private inputs of players be hidden. And at the same time, the simulator must find a way to extract these inputs from corrupted players, nevertheless. And the way it typically achieves this is using a technique called rewinding, which involves taking the adversary back to some previous point in the protocol and restarting the protocol again from that point on. And this is okay because especially in the classical setting, the simulator can take snapshots of the adversary state at various points in time, and then go back to previous snapshots and start the protocol again from that point on. And this is what is called rewinding. But it becomes a lot trickier in the quantum setting because the simulator can, in general, no longer copy arbitrary quantum states because of the no cloning. And specifically, if the adversary makes measurements in between, and so this leads to difficulties in rewinding, but it can be made to work in certain are the protocols of Watrous and Unruh. And okay, it says my internet is unstable, so I want to make sure that if there's any interruptions, please let me know.
Yeah, we did have some trouble in hearing you at some point.
Oh, I see.
You seem to be back. I mean, we got most of the words, but we just had some holes.
Oh, I see. Is there something I should go back to and talk about again?
I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I was saying that rewinding quantum adversaries is difficult. Nevertheless, it can be made to work in certain settings, but all protocols that manage to make this work require a polynomial number of rounds. And what we're interested in is getting constant round protocols. And so now I want to review some simulation techniques that have appeared previously. The first is rewinding, which, like I discussed, becomes tricky in the quantum setting. Another popular simulation technique is a non-black box technique that was invented by Barak, who showed that a simulator could commit to an adversary's code at some point of time in the protocol, and then use this to prove information or to extract information that it would otherwise not have been able to. It turns out that this technique, as is also not quantum friendly because it critically involves cloning the state of the adversary and proving things about it. An even more recent new non-black box simulation technique was developed in a joint work with Bitansky and Panit. And then even more recently, Bitansky and Shmueli, as well as Anant and Laplaka, showed applications of this simulation technique to obtaining the first constant round zero knowledge arguments against quantum provers and quantum verifiers. And then subsequently, in a joint work with Agarwal, Bartosek, Goyal, and Malavolta, we showed that we extended this technique to obtain what we call parallel no cloning simulation. And we use that to obtain constant round post-quantum MPC. So I'm going to delve into this homomorphic trapdoors technique very soon. But before that, I want to briefly state our main result. Our primary result is that there exists a constant round classical MPC protocol in the plane model secure against arbitrary quantum polynomial time adversaries, assuming the mildly superpolynomial hardness of LWE and an LWE-based circular security assumption. So I'm going to say a little bit more about these assumptions. The first assumption, what I mean by mildly superpolynomial hardness, is the assumption that there exists a constant C such that no quantum polynomial time adversary has an advantage better than lambda to the minus log lambda, where this log can go on for any constant number of times, in distinguishing LWE samples from uniform. So this is only slightly worse than assuming polynomial hardness of LWE. And then the second assumption is the LWE-based circular security assumption, is of the flavor of assumptions typically used to construct fully homomorphic encryption schemes. And in fact, we also use this assumption to construct a multi-key variant of quantum fully homomorphic encryption, which extends the notion of quantum fully homomorphic encryption to the multi-key setting. And in fact, we get something slightly stronger, which we call spooky quantum encryption. And this helps us achieve the first post-quantum constant round parallel zero knowledge arguments that extend the post-quantum constant round ZK that I just talked about, that was developed by Bitansky Shmueli and Anant and Laplaka. So one of our main contributions here is to extend the notion of standalone zero, to extend the construction of standalone zero knowledge against quantum provers and quantum verifiers to zero knowledge against parallel verifiers, where we require that the view of many verifiers interacting with a single prover be simulatable jointly. And turns out that standalone zero knowledge does not imply this notion. And in fact, in the quantum setting, we need to work much harder to get this. So with that said, I want to give a roadmap for the rest of this talk. I will first discuss the homomorphic trapdoor simulation technique that helps achieve post-quantum zero knowledge. And then I will discuss an extension of this technique to the multi-party homomorphic trapdoors paradigm that in particular lets us build parallel zero knowledge, as well as what we call parallel extractable commitments, which is a variant of extractable commitments where we want to extract from many adversarial committers at once in parallel. We also build post-quantum non-malleable commitments. And then we use the ingredients that we've developed so far to obtain post-quantum multi-party coin tossing that we show can be combined with existing post-quantum secure protocols in the CRS model to obtain post-quantum MPC. So let me start by talking about the homomorphic trapdoor simulation technique. We all know what zero knowledge is by this point, and we've also talked about it. But again, just a refresher, a zero knowledge argument is a protocol between a prover and a verifier who have public input X. And the prover has, in addition, a private input, which is a witness attesting to the membership of X in an NP language L. And the zero knowledge, this should satisfy completeness and soundness, which are standard properties, which say that if the prover and verifier are honest, then the verifier should accept the proof. If the prover is malicious, then the prover should not be able to convince the verifier to accept the proof of a false statement. And finally, the zero knowledge property, which is of the most interest to us here, requires that for every verifier that interacts with a prover in the real world, there exists a simulator that only has access to the public instance X and does not have access to the witness W, and nevertheless manages to generate a view for the verifier that is indistinguishable from its real view when interacting with an actual prover. So now to build zero knowledge using the homomorphic trapdoors technique, we will rely on two primary tools. The first is fully homomorphic encryption. This was first built in a seminal work of Gentry, and then refined in many subsequent works. And its applications to extraction and simulation in the context of proof systems and MPC was first explored in a work of Barak et al. And then in a work of Bitansky and Paneth. So fully homomorphic encryption, just to summarize, allows evaluations over encrypted ciphertexts without ever having to decrypt them. And this in particular allows parties to compute on encrypted data without needing to decrypt the underlying data. The second tool that we will use is a compute and compare obfuscation that was recently developed in concurrent works of Goyal, Coppola, and Waters, as well as Vixen, Zirdelis. And what this allows one to do is obfuscate programs that have a very specific structure. The structure is as follows. The program must output, so the program takes as input some value x and has hardwired inside it a function f, a lock value that I denote by lk, and a message m. And this compute and compare obfuscation should output the message m if and only if the function evaluated on the input x is equal to the lock value. So basically, this function returns bot everywhere except on inputs where f applied to x equals this lock value. And the concurrent works of Goyal et al. And Vixen Zirdelis showed that one could always obfuscate these programs as long as the lock value has sufficient entropy given the function f and the message m. Meaning that if the lock is hard to hit and has high entropy, or if it's hard to find, given the function f and the message m, if the lock still has high entropy, then a compute and compare obfuscation of such a program is going to be indistinguishable from a program that on every input outputs bottom. So I'm going to wait here for a few seconds just to give you a chance to look at this definition. So now we use these two ingredients to build a homomorphic trapdoor simulation technique as follows. The verifier is required to send to the prover a public key of a fully homomorphic encryption scheme, as well as an encryption under this public key of a randomly sampled trapdoor. So as you may have guessed from the title, the title of this technique is homomorphic trapdoors. So this involves the verifier homomorphically encrypting a randomly sampled trapdoor and sending it to the prover. So this is using a fully homomorphic encryption scheme. In addition, the verifier sends a compute and compare obfuscation of a program to the prover. This program is as follows. It basically checks on input X, it interprets X as a ciphertext and checks if the ciphertext decrypts to the lock value under the FHE secret key. So basically, given any FHE encryption of a lock value, the program outputs the FHE secret key. And on all other inputs, the program outputs bot. So what this means is that, okay, so actually let me move on with the protocol. In the next step, the prover must send to the verifier some trapdoor value. An honest prover can just send the all zero string or a uniformly randomly sampled value. And then the verifier sends to the prover the lock in the clear if the prover guessed the right trapdoor, meaning if the prover's trapdoor value equaled the verifier's trapdoor value, then the verifier returns lock and otherwise outputs bottom. And finally, the prover must prove to the verifier using a standard witness indistinguishable argument that either the instance is in the language or it knows a secret key for the FHE scheme being used that the verifier was using. So clearly, for an honest prover, guessing the trapdoor is hard because of security of the fully homomorphic encryption scheme. And therefore, the lock value is hidden from the view of any arbitrarily malicious prover. And since the prover doesn't know the lock value, there's no way for it to recover the secret key because the compute and compare obfuscation requires knowing an encryption of the lock. And as a result, the compute and compare obfuscation hides its underlying message, which is the secret key here. Because the secret key is hidden from the prover in this way, we can actually formally argue that no cheating prover can use the or I know the secret key branch of the witness indistinguishable argument, and therefore no cheating prover can break soundness here. When trying to prove zero knowledge, which is the more tricky part, we'll first make a simplifying assumption. We will assume that the verifier is explainable, meaning all messages that the verifier generates are in the support of honestly generated messages. it was shown in this work with Bitansky and Paneth that one can generically compile these protocols into protocols secure against arbitrary malicious adversaries. And really the tricky part is simulating even explainable verifiers. So this is going to be the most tricky part. And here I want to start by pointing out that if the simulator ever hopes to succeed in generating the simulated proof, because the simulator doesn't know a witness for X, it must use this branch of the WI that says that the simulator knows a secret key for the FHE scheme being used by the adversary. That means the simulator has to find the secret key somehow. Now, note that the only way to find the secret key is the compute and compare program. This program, again, recall that this program on input any encryption of the lock value returns the secret key SK. And on all other inputs, it returns bottom. So that means that in order to find the secret key, the simulator needs to input to this program an encryption of the lock value, which means now the simulator somehow needs to find an encryption of the lock value. To do this, the way the simulator is going to proceed will be as follows. Now note that the simulator has access to an encryption of the verifier's trapdoor. What if the simulator just sent to the verifier this encryption as is? Now recall that what the verifier was actually expecting was a trapdoor in the clear, but the simulator has an encryption of this trapdoor. It's here that we will use the fact that this is a fully homomorphic encryption, and therefore the simulator can actually evaluate the code of the verifier homomorphically on this encryption to get an encryption of the verifier's next message function. Now let's go back for a second again and see that the verifier on input the trapdoor would output the lock if the trapdoor matched its own trapdoor and would otherwise output bottom. Here instead, the simulator is homomorphically evaluating the verifier on an encryption of the trapdoor and is getting in response an encryption of the lock. And this is great now because now what the simulator can do is plug in this encryption of the lock value into the compute and compare obfuscation and learn the secret key. And this allows the simulator to generate a simulated proof. Importantly, note that we never rewound the adversary in this process and also never had to prove statements about the state of the adversary at any point in time. So this technique was developed initially in this work with Bitansky and Paneth, where we used it to get two message weak zero knowledge arguments, which is weak zero knowledge is a variant of zero knowledge which reverses the order of quantifiers and says that for every distinguisher, there exists a simulator that simulates the view of this particular verifier and distinguisher. And this helped go below the 3-round barrier that is known for zero knowledge arguments in the plain model. And then Bitansky and Shmueli and Anant and Laplaca showed that the same technique, but modified, and the modifications are very similar to the way I just presented it, showed that it can be used to get post-quantum zero knowledge in constant rounds by performing no cloning, straight line simulation that does not need to rewind the adversary. And I'm lying a little bit here. Rewinding does seem to be needed to get security against non-uniform adversaries, but considering if you look at only uniform adversaries, then there is no rewinding that's needed at all. However, it's very unclear how to use this same technique in the multi-party setting. And that's because now we would need a simulator that has many zero knowledge proofs going on at the same time and would need to simulate the view of many parallel verifiers at once. And if we didn't care for a constant round protocol, then this would not be a problem. But because we care about constant round protocols, we want to be able to simulate many proofs at the same time. So that brings me to the next part of this talk, which is how to extend this technique to the multi-party setting. So extending this to the multi-party setting involves or immediately encounters the following problem. Recall that the way we simulated was by having the simulator homomorphically evaluate the verifier's code on these encrypted trapdoors. If you have many verifiers that interact with the simulator at the same time, or in the real world interact with the same prover, but all these verifiers are corrupted by the same adversary, then each of these verifiers would be sending its own encrypted trapdoor. But because the adversary is quantum, it can only be evaluated one single time, which means the simulator must find a way to simultaneously homomorphically evaluate all the verifiers at once on their encrypted trapdoors. And this turns out to be hard to do if the protocol is unmodified. And our first idea is that this does seem to be possible if we replace the fully homomorphic encryption that's being used with a natural multi-key homomorphic encryption. So a multi-key fully homomorphic encryption allows computing circuits on encryptions under different public keys and results in an encryption under the combination of both keys. So in other words, it allows an evaluator to evaluate a circuit on encryption of M1 under PK1 and encryption of M2 under PK2, resulting in an encryption under both the public keys of the circuit applied to M1 and M2. And that's all that you need to know for this talk. And now, if we had multi-key FHE, then what the simulator could do would be to compute an encryption under both public keys of both trapdoors simultaneously, and now execute the adversary homomorphically under both public keys to obtain an encryption of both locks. So instead of doing this piecewise, as it appears in this picture, the simulator would simultaneously homomorphically evaluate the adversary on TD1 and TD2 to get LK1 and LK2 values. So at the end of this process, the simulator ends up with an encryption under both public keys of the first lock, as well as encryption under both public keys of the second lock. But now the problem is in the compute and compare obfuscation. So note that these obfuscations were generated by individual verifiers and were designed to work for their individual secret keys. But now we need to use these to actually decrypt these multi-key ciphertexts. So now I'm going to give you a few more details on how this is done. Here the simulator recall that the simulator again has access to encryptions of both locks under both public keys, and these individual compute and compare obfuscators that help the simulator obtain individual secret keys, if only the simulator had access to an encryption of the first lock under the first key and the second lock under the second key. Then our next idea is to build an encryption scheme that allows converting multi-key ciphertexts into layered ciphertexts or nested ciphertexts, where the idea is that we will use a special type of FHE where it's possible to go from encryption under two keys of the lock value to an encryption under the first key of an encryption under the second key of each lock value. And now that we have this, it's possible to homomorphically evaluate the compute and compare obfuscations in a nested fashion again. So more concretely, we could take the second ciphertext and homomorphically evaluate under the first public key the second compute and compare obfuscation. And this would result in learning an encryption under the first public key of the second secret key. And now that we have this, one could decrypt the first ciphertext homomorphically, resulting in an encryption under the first public key of the first lock value. And at the end, once we have this, we have exactly what we want. And the first compute and compare obfuscation can now be run on input and encryption of the first lock value under the first public key to recover the first secret key. So the bottom line is that being able to generate these nested ciphertexts actually helps us do various maneuvers and evaluate both these individual compute and compare obfuscators separately. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is how to build an encryption scheme that allows for converting from multi-key ciphertexts to nested ciphertexts. And it turns out that if the multi-key FHE had an additional property, which is commonly called AFS spooky encryption, then it would be possible to convert from multi-key to nested ciphertexts. And I'm going to talk about how. So an AFS spooky encryption is a special type of multi-key FHE where ciphertexts, multi-key ciphertexts can actually be represented as secret shares of the plain text under individual public keys. So any multi-key ciphertext looks like an encryption under PK1 of the first share of the plain text and an encryption under PK2 of a second share of the plain text, where both these shares are just additive secret shares of the underlying plain text. And this is a special case of multi-key FHE, where, like I said, a multi-key ciphertext is nothing but two encryptions under each of the public keys of shares of the underlying plain text. And now, given any AFS spooky encryption, observe that there is a simple maneuver that allows converting a multi-key ciphertext to a double ciphertext. And this is by evaluating this specific circuit that's displayed here. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but it's pretty easy to see that this can be done. Okay, so going back and summarizing what we looked at so far, if we had a quantum multi-key FHE, and so I want to go back and emphasize the quantum aspect of this because this is not something I talked about before. And let's go back to this slide and see that in the quantum setting, the verifier is an arbitrary quantum machine, and therefore the fully homomorphic encryption that we want to use should be a quantum fully homomorphic encryption. And the same holds for the multi-key setting. And so given a quantum multi-key FHE, which allows for classical encryption of classical messages, and where classical ciphertexts satisfy this additional AFS spooky structure that helps us convert from multi-key encryptions to double encryptions, we saw that one could extend the homomorphic trapdoor paradigm to be able to simulate and extract from multiple parallel quantum verifiers. And sorry, this should be verifiers here. And we use this technique to construct, like I said, post-quantum constant round zero knowledge against multiple parallel verifiers, as well as post-quantum constant round extractable commitments that allow for extraction from many parallel committers. And now both of these are used as building blocks for our post-quantum multi-party coin flipping protocol. Now let me give you some additional details about how we build quantum multi-key FHE with this additional AFS spooky structure. So single key schemes with quantum encryption for classical messages were first developed. Single key fully homomorphic schemes with quantum encryption for classical messages were first developed by Broadbent and Jeffrey and Dulac et al. And then Goyal gave a multi-key FHE scheme with quantum encryption for classical messages. And then subsequently, Mahadev and Rekursky gave single key fully homomorphic encryption schemes, which is the standard notion of fully homomorphic encryption, that enabled evaluating quantum circuits, but that allowed for classical encryption of classical messages. So our approach in this work is to extend the Mahadev 18 protocol for quantum FHE with classical encryption of classical messages to the multi-key setting. And I'm just going to say a few words about this. So Mahadev showed that FHE for classical circuits, which can be obtained assuming circular secure LWE, also implies FHE for quantum circuits if it satisfies a few additional properties. And I'm not going to go into what all those properties are, but critical for us is the following property. The property is that there must exist a trapdoor that can be used to recover the message and randomness that underlying any ciphertext in the scheme. So she needs that there exists this trapdoor such that given any ciphertext, combining the ciphertext with the trapdoor helps recover the message as well as the randomness underlying the ciphertext. Now, if we were able to get this property for existing multi-key FHE schemes, we would already be done, and we would be able to use Mahadev's result to get multi-key FHE in the quantum setting. However, this property, this trapdoor property, turns out to be not true for existing multi-key fully homomorphic encryptions, and it appears that obtaining a scheme with this exact property is difficult. So our key observation is that there is no need to maintain an explicit trapdoor for the multi-key FHE, as long as we can convert arbitrary multi-key FHE ciphertexts into dual regf ciphertexts that do have a trapdoor. So this observation leads to the following idea. We could use key switching in order to perform this conversion at stages where such a trapdoor is required. And as a result, by combining existing multi-key FHE schemes that also allow for distributed setup, which we also need for various other reasons, together with dual regf, we are able to obtain, and by performing key switching, we are able to obtain a quantum multi-key FHE. And then we apply key switching one more time to ensure that the multi-key FHE has this special AFS spooky structure. So I'm not going to go into further details of how this is done, but I'd encourage you to look at our paper if you're interested. I'm going to move on in this talk and talk about how we obtain post-quantum non-malleable commitments, which is another key component of our post-quantum MPC protocol. So a non-malleable commitment scheme is a scheme that is a scheme that prevents any man-in-the-middle adversary from taking honestly generated commitments and mauling them to produce commitments to related messages. So specifically, we consider this setting where there's a committer and a receiver, and there's a man in the middle who obtains messages from the honest committer, mauls them to create his own messages that he sends to the honest receiver, and so forth. And we want to ensure that the message M prime that the man in the middle ends up committing to in this process is independent of the message that an honest committer committed to. Now, how does one prove non-malleability? Intuitively, this is done by building a reduction that extracts the message being committed by the man in the middle in the right session, which is the message M prime, without breaking hiding of the left commitment. So if it were possible to extract M prime somehow while still arguing that the left commitment was hiding M, then this would guarantee that M prime would be independent of M. And I'm not going to go into more details about how this is done, but there's plenty of beautiful work showing how to do this using various techniques in the classical setting. Unfortunately, almost all those techniques need to rewind, but there turn out to be one or two that suffice for us. So I'm going to talk about only those techniques next. Before that, I want to say that one often considers a tag-based notion of security. This is done so as to prevent a man in the middle from exactly copying every message from left to right and so forth, because obviously a man in the middle that exactly copies each message sent by an honest party would end up creating two identical transcripts on the left and right, and would obviously then end up committing to the same message. So the tag-based notion of security prevents this by assigning identities to participants. Specifically, the committer is assigned an identity that is different from the identity of the man in the middle. And now we require that the message M prime committed by the man in the middle should be independent of the message M committed by an honest committer whenever their tags or identities are different. And if their identities are the same, then we have no guarantees. It turns out that this notion suffices for our application to MPC. And in fact, assuming signature schemes also implies a much stronger notion that I'm not going to get into because it's not very relevant for this talk. But to get non-malleable commitments with tag-based security as described above, there's been a long sequence of works, and many of these works take a two-step approach, and we will also take this approach. So first, we will show non-malleability for a small space of identities. meaning for the case where tags are chosen from a small set. And then we will show a tag amplification theorem that takes any non-malleable commitment scheme designed for a small space of tags and converts it into a scheme designed for an exponentially larger space of tags. So by applying this amplification step again and again, one can generically take any non-malleable commitment designed for log-sized spaces of tags and get a scheme that suffices for all possible exponentially many tags. So the second step follows standard techniques and combines them with post-quantum zero knowledge. And I'm not going to get into how this is done. And this hour, and it's pretty standard in the non-malleability literature by now. Okay, am I breaking up again? I see internet unstable again.
Yeah, you did before. I think you're back.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to continue then. Yeah. And so I'm going to focus on the first part, which is how we show non-malleability for small tag spaces. So our starting point is an erasure channel based approach. This from a work with Amit Sahai, where we show that one can formally prove non-malleability by establishing erasure channels between the committer and receiver. So more specifically, suppose there was an erasure channel between the committer and the man in the middle that transmitted the message being committed to the man in the middle with some probability P. And suppose there was a different erasure channel between the man in the middle and receiver that transmitted the message being committed by the man in the middle with a different probability. And if we set these probabilities so that the man in the middle's message gets transmitted much more often than the honest committer's message, and that means that there must exist sessions where the man in the middle gets nothing from an honest committer and nevertheless has to commit to something and transmit it to the receiver. And so we show that these erasure channels can actually be established using two-party secure computation techniques. And once we have such channels, it's possible to formally prove that by creating these asymmetries, that non-malleability holds. So I'm again not going to go into additional details of how this is done, but this was true. This was for the classical setting. And importantly, in that paper with Amit Sahai, we showed that the reduction must rewind the man in the middle again and again until the commitment on the right is extracted. On the other hand, in this work, we show that the same protocol is also quantum secure, but by giving a different proof that does not involve rewinding. All it does is rely on success probabilities of extraction from this erasure channel in a single session. And another difference from the work with Amit Sahai is that there we focused on building two-round protocols and therefore used complexity leveraging and needed sub-exponential hardness. And on the other hand, here we need only this mildly superpolynomial assumption that I just talked about. I also want to point out that if we cared about getting non-malleable commitments with quantum security from sub-exponential LWE, then there is a technique in a work of pass and V that works almost immediately. But we can improve it to mildly superpolynomial using this erasure channel method. Okay. So next I want to talk about how we combine post-quantum, how we combine our multi-party homomorphic trapdoors paradigm with non-malleable commitments to obtain coin tossing. Now, our goal now is to obtain fully simulatable coin tossing in the plane model, meaning parties do not have access to a trusted setup, and they want to communicate with each other to toss a random coin R. And our overall template is going to be the following. Each party will sample a uniformly random string and broadcast a non-malleable commitment to the string. So now non-malleability is critical here to ensure that parties don't choose their randomness as a function of the randomness used by other players, and therefore don't bias the resulting random coin. So each party will send a non-malleable commitment to the randomness R, And for technical reasons, we also need parties to send extractable commitment to the same randomness R. In the next step, each party will broadcast its randomness in the clear. So first parties commit to some randomness, then they all open it. And then they prove in zero knowledge that the value they opened is consistent with the value that they committed to in the first place. And if all these proofs verify, then the common output of the protocol is the XOR of all these random values. Now, this is very similar to templates used in the classical setting, but proving that this is post-quantum secure essentially boils down to relying on post-quantum non-malleability of the commitment, as well as post-quantum security of these zero-knowledge proofs that are now all running in parallel. So we critically seem to require parallel zero-knowledge in constant rounds. And so the next step is to use this coin tossing protocol to obtain a construction of post-quantum MPC. And this is done by relying on previous works of Lopez-Alt et al. And Mukherjee and Wicks, Garg and Sahai and Bitansky, and Benamuda and Lin, who obtained constant round post-quantum MPC protocols in the trusted setup model. And these can be instantiated with post-quantum primitives to again obtain already post-quantum MPC with trusted setup. But really the goal in this work is to get something without trusted setup and in the plain model. And it turns out that in some of these protocols, the trusted setup is nothing but a common random string. And the way that these protocols are proven secure is by allowing the simulator to program the CRS, and thereon the simulator is straight line. So what we observe is that if we used our constant round simulatable coin flipping protocol to generate this CRS, and then once we had the CRS, we ran these constant round MPC protocols in the CRS model on top of this CRS, then the resulting protocol would be post-quantum secure. So that brings me to the end of the overall picture on how we build post-quantum MPC. I guess I'm running a little bit early, but so in conclusion, we obtain a parallel, no cloning, non-rewinding simulation technique that extends the work, this work with Bitansky and Panet, as well as the work of Anant and Laplaca and Bitansky and Shmueli. To do this, we build quantum multi-key FHE that allows classical encryption of classical messages. And then we endow this with an additional AFS spooky property. We also build post-quantum non-malleable commitments. And using all these building blocks, our main result is the first construction of constant round classical MPC with security against quantum adversaries, where the security is essentially obtained by never rewinding the adversary and never cloning the adversary's state. One application of our work is in getting a quantum MPC protocol. So this is different from post-quantum MPC in that now we want parties, we also want honest parties to be able to evaluate quantum inputs on quantum circuits. And such a protocol was recently obtained by Dulek et al. But they assumed the existence of a post-quantum MPC protocol for classical circuits, which only existed in models with trusted setup until now. And our work can be used to instantiate this protocol in the plain model and therefore also obtain quantum MPC in the plain model with security against quantum adversaries. And we believe that this new parallel no cloning technique the multi-party homomorphic trapdoors technique may have additional applications. And finally, I want to summarize with some open problems. And the first of these is whether post-quantum MPC can be obtained from better assumptions. So we needed mildly superpolynomial hardness of LWE, as well as a circular security assumption. And it's completely unclear why circular security should be needed at all, or why superpolynomial hardness should be needed, or whether we can get MPC from any post-quantum oblivious transfer protocol, as is commonly true in the classical setting, or whether we can get post-quantum MPC protocols that make black box use of cryptography. And so there are all these questions about why such strong assumptions and complex protocols are about whether all these things are really needed in the post-quantum setting. And another question is whether one can obtain multi-party protocols with some form of composable security, even in the plain model. Another interesting question is whether one can obtain post-quantum simulators for protocols with low communication complexity. And it's interesting to understand exactly how much communication is needed in these protocols. Because we're already using FHE, we suspect that it should be possible to highly optimize communication, but this seems hard. It seems hard to make this work with simulation techniques. Another interesting question is whether one can achieve, whether one can combine our techniques for post-quantum MPC with quantum delegation protocols that delegate quantum computations to to quantum provers and enable classical verification. And it's interesting to understand whether our techniques can be used to do distributed verification. And then finally, another interesting open problem is whether one can get even stronger models of malicious security for MPC. For example, security in the presence of adaptive corruptions. And with that, I would like to conclude the talk. Thank you so much once again for patiently listening and for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, while people think about what questions they might post on the questions and answers section here, maybe I can ask one question, which was about the coin tossing protocol. If you can go back maybe to the slide where you had that one. Because I was just wondering, so the protocol says that you must prove in zero knowledge that the randomness is consistent with a non-malleable commitment, but not with the extractable commitment, it seems, which seems surprising because one would expect that a simulator probably has to extract from the commitment, use that randomness. And what if you commit to different things there?
No, you're absolutely right. Thank you. You actually got a typo. I should have said extractable commitment also there. That's a typo.
Okay.
So sorry about that. You're absolutely right that actually this is, you need to prove that it's consistent with both.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, then that was very short. So then I have another one. So I think you said several times that what you need to have here is quantum FHE.
Yes.
Which supposedly means so that you can encrypt also quantum data and get a quantum ciphertext. Yes.
So what we really need is the ability to. You're right, but what we're actually doing is taking a classical ciphertext, evaluating a quantum circuit on it. This quantum circuit is guaranteed to produce a classical ciphertext. Sorry, a classical response. Right. So we start with a classical ciphertext, end up with a classical ciphertext, but evaluate a quantum circuit in between. We also, so another thing I want to point out though is that the adversary may be maintaining quantum states, and we also want to generate the adversary state in order to perform simulation and generate views correctly. So that needs to be, that part of it needs to be quantum.
Right. So I was just, so is there some intuition for why any classical FHE doesn't satisfy this? I mean, nothing stops me from taking an FHE ciphertext, whatever, evaluating a quantum circuit on this, measuring the output, and then I get some classical output. What's wrong with that?
So why can you not take any classical FHE and evaluate quantum circuits on it? So I think that the eval procedure is defined for FHE schemes in a particular way. And it's not, and I think this goes back to the work of Mahadev, but it's not clear that you can take any FHE scheme built for classical circuits and apply quantum gates like Clifford.
Okay.
In mind about how one would do this.
Okay, I see. Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I don't see any other questions on the Q&A window. So if that was it, then let's thank Dakshita for a great talk.
Thank you.
And then we will take a break until in about 7 minutes, I suppose. We will resume again. at which point Peter